nobody's picking up, so I just am gonna dump this here. It's the middle of the day, I completely understand, but I just had a really harrowing experience at work. I have this one coworker who simply refuses to use the correct pronouns for me. I've called her out every time she misgenders me, and she just is resigned to not change. And today just broke something in me. I just snapped. I ended up yelling at her after the third time she misgendered me, and within like 30 minutes, like, I use they, them pronouns. And she got so defensive. And I just started explaining to her, like, I'm sick and tired of this shit. Like, you need to at least make an attempt. And she popped off, got upset, got defensive. What are you gonna do about it? And I just said, I'm gonna be really hurt and sad. Like,
in 2022, the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty wrote on behalf of 3 8th grade boys who had been charged with sexual harassment under Title IX for misgendering a classmate. The letter reads, "We represent the families of 3 8th grade boys and the boys themselves, who the district recently charged with sexual harassment under Title IX for mispronouncing. The district's position appears to be that using what the district calls incorrect pronouns, after being informed that a student's preferred pronouns were they, them, automatically constitutes punishable sexual harassment under Title IX. The complaint against these boys and the district's ongoing investigation are wholly inappropriate and should be immediately dismissed. The mere use of biologically correct pronouns not only does not constitute sexual harassment under Title IX or the district's own policy, it is also speech protected by the First Amendment."
I don't understand what is so hard about correcting other people when they misgender others. Like, it takes you like 2 seconds, but you know what it takes for me to have to constantly do that? A lot of fucking unnecessary emotional labor that I already have to take on a daily basis just to fucking exist and be who I am. But you don't have the energy to speak up and say something on my behalf? And I just have to keep white-knuckling this?
The district has also violated Title IX procedures in its own policy in its handling of the complaint. The district should promptly end the investigation, dismiss the complaints, and remove them from each of the boys' records. Sexual harassment, as defined in both Title IX and the district's policy, typically covers things like rape, sexual assault, dating violence, stalking, inappropriate touching, and quid pro quo sexual favors. None of that, or anything even close to it, is alleged here. While there is a catch-all for unwelcome conduct that is so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive that it effectively denies a person equal access to education, Davis v. Monroe County Board of Education, courts have made it clear that this high standard does not cover commonplace schoolyard altercations, such as name-calling, teasing, and minor physical scuffles, even where these comments target differences in gender. It certainly does not cover using biologically correct pronouns simply because the district characterizes it as mispronouncing, which is the sole allegation in the one-page Title IX complaint. Mispronouncing is also not sexual harassment under Title IX because gender identity is not included within the definition of sex within Title IX. In fact, the Department of Education is currently attempting to amend Title IX to add it.
Decades of women fighting for Title IX has just been completely thrown out thanks to Biden, who thinks he's a dictator and has the right to completely rewrite Title IX. Even though Congress needs to approve this, he doesn't seem to care. And so basically the new rewrite is saying that men can take academic and athletic scholarships from women. Men have full access to bathrooms, locker rooms. They can even be housed in women's dorm rooms. And students and faculty must compel their speech by requiring the use of preferred pronouns. And guess what? If you don't, then you can be charged with harassment. If anyone, any woman especially, is voting for this guy still, you're insane.
Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 protects people from discrimination based on sex in education programs or activities that receive federal financial assistance. Title IX states, "No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance." In other words, the original Title IX was meant to protect women against discrimination from federally funded educational programs, which would include admission to colleges, sports teams, and access to educational resources such as funding. It would also protect women against organizational misogyny, wherein women could be booted or pressured from programs on the basis of their sex, amongst other examples. However, as noted by the Women's Liberation Front, Only hours after being sworn into office, Biden signed an executive order that builds on the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Bostock v. Clayton County and ensures that the federal government interprets Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 as prohibiting workplace discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, according to the Biden Transition Team website. The order also ensures that federal anti-discrimination statutes that cover sex discrimination prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. Federal civil rights officers will also be required to enforce this interpretation in any matter that comes before them, likely including citing against women's rights in court cases. With this action, Biden is bypassing the legislative process to implement the most controversial provisions of the Equality Act, changing the definition of sex in federal anti-discrimination regulations so that female people are no longer a discrete class with protected status under the law.
We're likely going to be forced to listen to transphobic bigotry, because actually protecting female athletes in Title IX is important. You all are working so hard at excluding and demonizing a bunch of kids. I think it's important that we raise the voices of transgender athletes, their families, and teammates.
Let me be perfectly clear. A school that knowingly allows a male athlete to take a spot on a women's team or allows a male athlete to take the field in a women's game is denying a female student athletic opportunity. And that is sex-based discrimination, and it violates Title IX, regardless of what the new regulations might say. It is my sincere hope that members of this committee will take action to stop the Biden administration's illegal and administrative rewrite of Title IX. Of course, there is a place for everyone, regardless of gender identity, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of race or what sports you play. There's a place for everyone to play sports in this country. But unsafe, unfair, and discriminatory practices towards women must stop. Inclusion cannot be prioritized over safety and fairness. And Ranking Member Lee, if my testimony makes me transphobic, then I believe your opening monologue makes you a misogynist. Thank you.
It was warned that this legislation would drastically impact women's rights and safety on a variety of issues, which would include female federal employees no longer having the right to privacy, federal employees being forced to validate gender identity, domestic violence shelters being forced to house men with women, women in federal incarceration being forced to be housed with violent male offenders, doctors being forced to provide affirmative care, Title IX protections for women in schools being revoked, leading to girls' sports being eliminated. Now, if you keep up with the news, you'll likely be aware that many of these have already occurred. Men compete in women's sports regularly. Women are being housed with men and becoming pregnant in jails as a result.
A trans woman has impregnated 2 inmates in a women's-only prison. After the incidents were uncovered, she was transferred away from the all-female facility, but is currently trying to fight her way back. The transgender prisoner has complained about not being able to safely wear makeup around male prison inmates. She also claims she's been addressed by the wrong he/him pronouns over 30 times.
I'm just being patient right now. It's difficult, it's frustrating.
However, it wasn't until the week of April 15th, 2024, that the new Title IX regulations dropped, which rewrote sex protections to include gender identity and therefore erased any protections based on sex.
The rewrite of Title IX is an abomination. It is equating sex to gender identity, which means men would live in dorm rooms with women, men would have full access to bathrooms, changing areas, locker rooms, joint sororities, which we're seeing happening. It's happening at University of Wyoming. Men could take academic and athletic scholarships away from women. In this new rewrite, it's actually sexual harassment. If you misgender a trans-identified individual, it's sexual harassment. That if you're in a dorm room and you're a woman and you feel uncomfortable sharing this dorm room, if you complain and ask to be moved, you're guilty of sexual harassment.
One of the greatest changes this brings is the labeling of accurate language referring to one's sex as sexual harassment, such as what occurred in the aforementioned 2022 case. This makes it difficult to protest or even accurately discuss what has been occurring in all levels of society. When you are debating sports and refer to the issue as trans women being excluded from women's sports, it sounds as if a type of woman is being unfairly excluded from a group she belongs to. It implicitly supports the idea that trans women are women and continues to erase the reality of sex differences. It makes it harder to argue for the exclusion of trans women from women's sports because there's already a concession that the two are an overlapping group, even if it is just a verbal agreement for the sake of continuing the conversation. When you phrase the issue accurately, that men want to play in women's sports, the issue becomes more readily apparent and accurate. This is not an issue of excluding a disabled woman or a black woman or short women from a women's group. It is the upholding of a necessary boundary wherein men are not allowed to compete with women in women's groups. This extends to trans rights activist issue with misgendering in general. On sexmatters.org, Justin Webb notes in relation to Scotland's new hate speech law. In 2021, when the Equality and Human Rights Commission intervened in the Forstater case to support the rights of gender-critical people at work, Stonewall signed an open letter that described the intervention as a kick in the teeth. It accused the human rights watchdog of putting its organizational weight behind a movement that has only contributed to rising hate for trans people and communities, creating a policy environment where it is harder for trans people to access their rights. In May 2022, the Employment Tribunal hearing of barrister Alison Bailey revealed that Stonewall staff had reported her to her chambers, Garden Court, for misgendering. During cross-examination, Stonewall's head of trans inclusion, Kieran Metcalf, confirmed that Stonewall's position was that misgendering is inherently transphobic. This comes amid a myriad of legislation, from Canada to the US to the UK, wherein misgendering is considered a hate crime. And the question is, why? It's not illegal to refer to Rachel Dolezal as white, even though she identifies as black. It's an accurate reference to her material reality. Why is it so hurtful to have your biological sex recognized? It's not that people don't know. If anything, some may play along and be nice and use the words you want to protect your feelings, but that's not a true recognition of a trans-identified person as the sex they wish to be, which they are well aware of. Hence why you'll find many Reddit posts complaining about thought crimes and so much pressure to be validated through romantic or sexual relationships. Misgendering is viewed as a crime and affront to human dignity because of the redefinition of woman and man to uphold gender roles and stereotypes. By claiming that womanhood is based on femininity and stereotypes, and defining manhood as the same, calling a trans-identified person their sex becomes a loaded statement wherein you are implying negative and unwanted stereotypes rather than the gender-critical view, which simply acknowledges biological sex.
Let me explain why misgendering is an act of violence. I know this sounds extreme, and I know I talk about this a lot, but this is because the situation is extreme. Getting misgendered as a trans and non-binary person not only triggers the trauma of being conditioned into a gender that is not ours, but it also triggers the trauma of existing in a world that at large would prefer we did not exist. So getting misgendered can feel like a smack in the heart. It represents all that we are up against. And yes, mistakes absolutely happen. But let's say you turn a corner and accidentally smack someone across the face. You wouldn't immediately be like, hey look, it was an accident. You would tend to their pain and make sure it doesn't happen again. But then every time you turn that same corner, you continue to smack that person. Yes, it may still be unintentional, but at a certain point, the lack of intention is a choice. So maybe first you have to take in the fact that this causes real harm, and then approach your misstep with the level of awareness and effort that it will take to stop hurting us. I love you.
Misgendering isn't real. It's a name to give false importance to hurt feelings over the recognition of immutable biological sex and nothing more. Similarly to the Stroop effect, which refers to our tendency to experience difficulty naming a physical color when it is used to spell the name of a different color. By using the pronouns and the language they prefer, we are participating in our own programming to view them as the sex they want to be rather than the sex they are. It's not such a benign request, after all. This, dear viewers, is where we part. I wasn't intending to take this direction with the script, but this news came out just last week while I was working on it, so I had to rewrite what I already had written to reference the changes to education, which I gotta say, I'm really glad that I'm out of college, no longer living in dorms, because I can just imagine the difficulty that I would have with living with a guy who identified as a woman, or having to play sports against him, or any of the many, many issues this bill will create. In the weeks and months going forward, I'm sure that we'll see how this bill is used to harm people who are speaking out against what is a very obvious bad choice. But until then, if you guys have any comments, questions, or concerns, let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!